on several of those. Definitely act on all of the personal factors. It can act on the structured office. It can act on the access to activity spaces. So conceptually, there is no doubt that sport organizations can help. Now, this is the holy grail of health research, the Oracle of Delphi. If you want to go and see what the really hard-nosed health researchers think about something, you go to the Cochrane collaboration. This is an institution that specializes on carrying out analyses, not of single studies, but analyses of groups of studies by using the most stringent criteria you can possibly think about. And now, there are reviews on all different topics, and if you go through them, you have a positive surprise. There actually is a review on interventions implemented through sporting organizations for increasing participation in sport. That's a positive surprise, I must say. Now, if you're looking at the summary, the sports sector is viewed as a priority area for increasing the rates of physical activity. Perfect. We all agree with that. Now, if you look at sports stats there, in this systematic review, we did not find any controlled studies assessing the effects of interventions to increase participation in sport. And the author's conclusion, there is an absence of high-quality evidence to support interventions designed and delivered by sporting organizations to increase participation in sport. That's outrageous, isn't it? Now, what we can do is we can complain about these hard-nosed scientists there, but I think what we should really do is we should try and address these. And I'm just going to show you an example of how we actually tried to do this. This was a study we did in Switzerland. We used the data from the panel studies where some 7,000 people have been asked, I think, up to 7 years in a row about several things, including their physical activity. And this is, I'm just going to take you through this step by step. We looked at the relative risk of being inactive depending on whether you were a member of the sports club or not. This is cross-sectional stuff, cross-sectional data at the same time. And I'm taking you through the men first. You are comparing, these were 15 to 25-year-old men. We're comparing the sports club members. This is taken arbitrarily as one. This is a reference to the non-members. And you can see here, the non-members have a risk of almost 7 times as high of doing no sports. Well, okay, that makes sense because you go to a sports club to do sports. Now, what is really interesting, we also looked at inactivity. And that's not only sport, that's overall physical activity. And even there, the risk was about 5 times higher. Now, what you can say again here, well, we also looked at women, and you see it's roughly the same numbers in men and in women. That's nice, but you can say, okay, people go to a sports club because they want to do sports, and they would do the sports even if they weren't in the club. What we did the next thing was we looked at not being inactive, but becoming inactive. Because we had data over several years. We looked at what was the risk of people of becoming inactive, only looking at the people who previously were active. And now again, the men, the reference is people who remain members of the sport club. If they become non-members, if they leave the club, they have a risk of almost 8 times higher of becoming no sport, of doing no more sports. And it was about the same as of those who had never been members of the sport club. Now, for activities, somewhat lower numbers, but very similar, 6 times. And if we looked at the women, practically the same, even much higher in this very instance. So this is obviously not the only study that's going to prove it all, but I think we need more research like that we can show to the really hard-nosed scientists and explain to them why we can actually help people to become more active through sports organizations. Now, another item, can major sport events help people to become more active? You all know the rhetorics. If there is a big event, and that was the case in Sydney, for example, that was the case also, I'm going to come back to that, in Switzerland, that's been the case now for London, for the Olympics, there are always great expectations and promises. Things are usually not evaluated. What we see is if there is a specific event, sport club membership might go up, but usually no evidence for changes in physical activity levels. And what is sad, very often big event has been assigned, there is a reorientation of sport promotion away from sports for all and physical activity towards elite sports. And that has been a fact. It has been a fact, for example, in Australia, I think also in Canada, after Calgary, and what is happening now within the UK isn't very promising either. Now, we had a little experience in Switzerland. We're not a big country, so we haven't organized Olympic Games for a long time, but we've organized, together with our neighbors, the Austrians, the European Football Cup, which was a big event for our country. Great expectations, great promises, no evaluation. We had great increases in boys wanting to join football. They couldn't actually take them all in. It was a real problem. They couldn't cope with it. And that was the case. No evidence of changes in physical activity levels. No, we didn't expect it. And what's happening now, money goes away from sports for all and goes into elite sports. So I think this can be a real problem. But we also have a positive experience. There was a pilot project for youth and sport kids. We've had the youth and sports program 10 to 20 years for a long period of time. And there has been the possibility to enlarge this to the 5 to 10-year-olds. It went through Parliament against the will of the sport minister, against the will of the finance minister, and against the will of the director of the Federal Office of Sport. That was because there was so much pressure from the cantons, from the members of Parliament. They wanted to have something in sports for all, but it's not necessarily the top politicians who want that. So I think, and this is what Adrian Borman and his colleagues had to say about this, the public health potential of mass participation events remains to be realized. It's not impossible, I wouldn't say that, but it hasn't really been proven yet that these things really do help in the long run, physical activity promotion. And finally, what is the institutional role of sport in physical activity promotion? Theoretically, you could think of 3 roles, and this is exactly the same question as Logan has asked it for the local level, also at the national level. You could think of an independent development, you could think of a partnership, and you could think of a leading role. Now, there has been a first study within the first HEPA Europe network, which was a project run mainly by the Finns and by the Dutch in the 90s, that looked at examples from 4 European countries. Netherlands on the Move was one of the projects in the 90s, Alle Hopp in Switzerland, Fit for Life in Finland, and Active for Life in England. Now, 2 of them were run by the sports sector, 2 of them were run by the health sector. 10 years later, the sad thing, only one of them was still alive. The Finns are incredible. They keep going, you know. Only the Finns. All the others, they had changed. The good thing, all the countries were still active in physical activity. For example, NISB had been created in the Netherlands and had taken over what the National Olympic Committee had done before. But if you look at the role of the sectors, all of them were run by the health sector. All of them. And if we're looking now at the international level, it is currently the exception if the sport really takes the lead. One example I know of a well-established program is New Zealand. And there might be a few others, but it's rather the exception. So actually sport, to some extent, has rather pulled out of physical activity promotion as a whole compared to what the situation was 10 or 15 years ago. So the question here is a question mark, actually, what the institution will. Now the way forward, and there I largely agree with what had been said earlier, physical activity is a long-term endeavour. No question. There is no magic bullet. If there were one, it would have been found, because people have been active doing it so long. The efforts of all actors are really necessary. I think it makes perfect sense, and that's the case at the local level, as we've heard in the healthy cities, and definitely also at the national and international level, to combine the approaches and the resources, particularly to reach all population groups, because none of us can reach all population groups on its own. We must do this jointly. We must use the strengths of the specific approaches, and you have the obvious strengths of the Sports for All movement. You have very good structures, excellent traditions, you have many volunteers, but we must also be aware of their limitations and compensate them through partnerships, as it has been demonstrated through this Congress. And I think a last thought is, we are not only actors within our own sector, but we are all active citizens. So we can talk to our colleagues, we can talk to the politicians, and we can also affect changes in other parts and other sectors of life, not only in public health or in sports, where we come from. Now, a specific suggestion may be something we can take up now with the international sports organizations as well, for combining our resources, is if you look at Agita Mundo, one of our activities is the World Day for Physical Activity. It's something Victor Matsudo has been very successful in promoting, and will continue to do that. The motto of the next year will be Together for an Active and Happy Life. Victor Matsudo has been extremely successful, and his colleagues within South America, to really do mass mobilization events. We haven't even tried to do that in Europe, and the reason is they've already existed. So what we would like to discuss is the possibility of maybe collaborating further on these things instead of duplicating things. I have been in the organizing committee, I have been a participant of the Swiss Federal Gymnastics Festival. I was very impressed there. I've been in the organizing committee only of a small one of our canton, but I have every respect for what work is behind that and the excellent job these people are doing. We couldn't possibly do that for public health, there's no question. But maybe we could join forces and use the possibilities we have from that. And this is my final slide now. Thank you for your attention.